Racist cop slap the wrong judge. 4 minutes later, their empire begins to crumble. A slap in a courtroom is not something that happens often. But when that slap lands on the face of a black woman, and that woman happens to be the highest-ranking judge in the city, it's no longer just an act of insult. It's the beginning of a reckoning. An intense and gripping story is unfolding. To continue this journey, hit like and subscribe to Black Strength Stories so you don't miss our next powerful episode. On Monday morning at 8:26 a.m., the Superior Court of Havenbrook, a majestic courthouse over 150 years old, opened its doors for what seemed like a routine session. The trial of a 16-year-old boy accused of spray-painting graffiti on the walls of the Central train station. It was one of over 300 minor offenses heard each quarter, with an average case duration of just 15 minutes. But that morning, in less than 4 minutes, the case would trigger the most seismic shock to Havenbrook's justice system in modern history. The woman who entered the courtroom drew no attention. She wore a charcoal gray blouse, dark slacks, and low-heeled shoes. Nothing that suggested authority. No clerks followed her, no security escorts, no signature black robe. And yet, with every calm, steady step she took, the atmosphere in the room shifted. Across the aisle stood Sergeant Logan Moore, 47 years old, 3-time recipient of the Blue Valor Award, stationed at the prosecutor's desk. With his broad frame, military-style haircut, and gleaming insignia on his chest, Logan cut the image of unquestioned dominance. The only son of Havenbrook's former police chief, he had served 22 years without ever facing suspension. At least, not officially. Moore caught sight of the woman entering and immediately scowled. Another lost admin staffer, he thought. With visible irritation, he barked, "Ma'am, that area isn't for staff." "Step outside now." The woman didn't respond. She walked to the assistant's table, gently placed a file folder down, and opened it. Logan approached her, voice rising. "I'm talking to you. Do you hear me? This area is for legal personnel. Who gave you clearance?" And then, in what may have seemed like an instinct, but was unmistakably an act of aggression, Logan Moore raised his hand and struck the woman hard across the cheek, right in front of the entire courtroom. The sound cracked through the chamber, echoing off the marble walls. A pen dropped to the stone floor. The clicking of keyboards stopped. An assistant judge's coffee cup slipped from their hand, too stunned to react. She didn't scream. She didn't flinch. She didn't shed a tear. She simply turned her head slightly to the right, eyes dark and bottomless, the kind of stare born from years of justice, suffocated in silence, looking directly at the man who had just committed the ultimate offense. From the back row, a woman's voice broke the stunned silence, a whisper heavy with the weight of careers. "Oh my God, that's Judge Callista Parker." In Havenbrook, judges are usually remembered for controversial rulings, flashy press conferences, or appearances on local television. But Callista Parker wasn't that kind of person. Not because she lacked influence, but because she chose to make an impact in silence. Callista Parker, 62 years old, is currently the Chief Justice of Havenbrook, the first and only black woman ever to sit in what many consider an untouchable seat. But the path that brought her to that position is a long indictment of blood, tears, and bitter truths that most people would rather not confront. She was born in East Havenbrook, a poor area adjacent to the old industrial zone, where the sound of truck horns was more frequent than the sound of teaching in school. Her father, Michael Parker, was a dock worker who was wrongfully arrested by police for assault. He was held for 42 days without any concrete evidence, without legal representation, and received no compensation after being released. He died 9 months later from a stroke. Callista was just 13 years old at the time. And from that day on, she vowed never to let anyone else be buried in silence by the system the way her father had been. No one believed the skinny girl who borrowed shoes from her neighbor to take the SAT would one day earn a full scholarship to Harvard Law School in 1980. But Callista didn't just receive the scholarship, she graduated with honors, ranking in the top 5% of the class of 1984, and worked as a research assistant for Professor Elena Morrison, one of the leading human rights scholars of the time. Instead of joining prestigious law firms with six-figure salaries, Callista returned to Havenbrook as a public defender, often taking on the cases no one wanted to touch, from homeless individuals accused of stealing bread to single mothers being forcibly evicted. For 9 years, she drove a single 1986 Buick and lived in a third-floor apartment with no elevator. In 1993, she was invited to join the prosecutor's office at the request of the sitting mayor. It was there that she launched over 40 internal investigations, not against civilians, but against police officers suspected of abusing their power, often ignored due to lack of evidence. Some called her the grave digger within, and she even received anonymous threats. But she never backed down. In 2007, Callista was appointed as a trial judge, and just 4 years later, with 83% approval from the State Judicial Council, she was officially granted the position of Chief Justice of the city. There was no grand speech, no celebratory wine reception. She simply walked into her new office, took off her coat, poured a glass of water, and wrote in her personal notebook, "If justice will not protect us, then we must rise to protect justice." Throughout her tenure, Callista was known for prioritizing justice over mere legality. She once released a young man arrested for marijuana possession, but fined a real estate development firm $5,000 for deliberately destroying low-income housing. Right-wing media called her a leftist judge, a champion of the impoverished. But to residents in poor neighborhoods, she was the eyes of justice. She declined at least 3 offers to become a legal advisor to the state governor, positions that paid 5 times more and directly influenced state policy. But she refused for one reason only. The judiciary should never be subordinate to the executive. If someone controls me, they can control the law. Callista didn't live in a mansion. She lived with her sister, who suffers from chronic insomnia, and her 13-year-old nephew Malik in a small home in Old Haven. Every morning, she prepared her own lunch, usually a spinach and boiled egg sandwich in a plastic container, carried in a cloth bag. People said she was cold, quiet, stern. But those close to her knew that Callista was a smoldering flame, one that never flared violently, but also never went out. And on that fateful morning in courtroom number 3, when a man struck her across the face with the full arrogance of unchecked authority, that flame finally ignited, not to seek revenge, but to shine a light on a system that had lived in darkness for far too long. If Callista Parker was the embodiment of composure and principle, then Logan Moore was the symbol of unchecked power fueled by privilege and fear. In Havenbrook, many people knew of Moore, but not everyone truly knew him. Logan Moore, 47, police sergeant, was the eldest son of the late police chief Thomas Moore, who held office for 16 years during the darkest era of Havenbrook, from 1989 to 2005. The Moore family was so renowned that a bronze bust stood in the city police department's lobby, engraved with the words, "3 generations defending justice." But the justice the Moores defended was perhaps only a shadow of power under the guise of protection. Logan followed in his father's footsteps in 1998, after graduating from the Georgia State Police Academy, and joined the Havenbrook Force in 1999. Within just 5 years, Moore had been promoted to sergeant, largely thanks to his family's legacies and close ties with city officials. In 2005, he received a commendation as the Outstanding Urban Security Officer after cracking down on a string of thefts in a poor neighborhood, leading to over 40 arrests, 38 of which were black individuals. Behind the medal, however, was a thick file of complaints. From 2010 to 2020, Moore was the subject of 17 official grievances, 3 for use of excessive force during duty, 5 for alleged use of racial slurs, particularly toward black women, 4 for coercing confessions from underage suspects, and 1 for allegedly fabricating evidence in the arrest of an African-American student named Malcolm Dupre, who was exonerated after 19 months of wrongful detention. Yet Moore was never prosecuted or seriously suspended. Behind him was an untouchable shield named ADA Carson Ramsey, one of the most powerful prosecutors in the Havenbrook region. Between Moore and Ramsey existed an old-school symbiotic relationship. Ramsey needed officers who got things done. Moore needed a DA willing to overlook a few inconsistencies in paperwork. According to a leaked internal financial report in 2021, Moore held a bank account in Delaware, a state that often doesn't require public disclosure of account ownership, with transactions exceeding $72,000 over 3 years. When questioned, he claimed it was performance bonuses and personal investments. But independent investigators found no legitimate income sources matching the listed transactions. Moore's communication habits also spoke volumes. He frequently referred to black women as Missy, a term historically used to demean black women during the Jim Crow era. Several rookie female officers had reported Moore speaking to them in a patronizing or domineering tone, but none dared to file formal complaints because Moore has backing from the very top. Internal personnel records, not available to the public, include a special note from the Havenbrook Police Department's Administrative and Psychological Division. There are signs of overstepping authority, poor emotional regulation in high-stress environments, recommend enhanced behavioral supervision, has previously refused to attend routine psychological evaluations. Notably, this note appeared shortly after Moore was accused of pistol whipping an unarmed teenager during a 2018 foot chase. On the morning of the courthouse incident, Moore arrived early, at 7:42 a.m., and requested to present charges in the juvenile graffiti case. He wore a freshly pressed uniform, face full of smugness, believing he would wrap it up like usual. In his mind, it was just another morning with another black kid caught defacing property and another nameless courtroom. And when the plainly dressed woman entered, with no title, no escort, no authority displayed in badges or bright lights, what he saw was something he had grown used to dominating for over 2 decades. The silence of those he deemed unworthy of respect. He was wrong. The slap across Callista Parker's face didn't just silence the courtroom. It was the opening shot in the biggest judicial earthquake in Havenbrook's history. Within 4 minutes, the arrogance of one officer became the blade that severed the false safety net he and others like him had long used to evade justice. Immediately after the slap, without blinking, without flinching, Callista pulled out her phone. This wasn't a routine call. She pressed 3 keys, then entered code 47, a special judiciary code in Havenbrook, meaning direct assault on a judicial officer in the execution of duty. The call was routed to the North Haven State Bureau of Judicial Investigations and immediately logged by an on-duty officer. Beside her, a young officer named Jermaine Mills, fresh out of the academy less than 2 years, began to tremble. He realized the woman who had just been slapped was not some administrative staff. He stepped back and silently reached for the security controller attached to his belt, triggering an internal Level 2 alert, typically reserved for when a suspect poses a violent threat inside the courthouse. It was an action that, if discovered prematurely, could cost him his job. but he did it anyway. He had once taken a class titled Ethical Law Enforcement, taught by none other than Callista Parker in 2019. Meanwhile, Logan Moore still didn't realize he had crossed a point of no return. He kept shouting, veins rising in his neck. "I don't care who you are. In here, I am the law. And if you disobey, you'll be dealt with like any other disorderly person." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. A reporter from the Havenbrook Gazette, named Lisa Ortega, present to cover the graffiti hearing, immediately switched her phone to record mode. A few audience members began live streaming the unfolding scene. In less than 3 minutes, the first video was posted to X, formerly Twitter, with the caption, "Officer slaps a woman, then finds out she's the Chief Justice." Within an hour, the video had surpassed 600,000 views, with thousands of shares. By now, Callista had stepped onto the judge's bench, without announcing her name, without stating her title. She picked up the old gavel placed in front of her and struck it 3 times, the sound echoing through the stunned chamber. The trial hasn't begun, but judgment already has. It was a sentence spoken calmly, yet it shook the room far more than any of Logan Moore's shouts. "Do you know who I am?" she asked, eyes still locked on Moore. "I don't need to know. You don't belong here. You're not the one with authority," he responded, standing tall, without an ounce of remorse. Callista looked around. Then she said clearly, each word like a blade, "And that is exactly why you must be held accountable." At that moment, Officer Jermaine Mills stepped forward and addressed the entire room. "Judge Parker, I confirm. Courtroom 3 has 4 operational surveillance cameras, all currently recording and archiving to the judiciary's internal server." Callista nodded. She cited the exact statute from North Haven state law, Article 14, Section 5, Clause B, concerning assault on a judicial officer in the line of duty, with a penalty range of 18 months to 15 years if racial motivation or abuse of authority is proven. Right then and there, Callista issued the order. Sergeant Logan Moore is to be taken into immediate custody. This act is no longer within the scope of internal police review. It is a serious criminal case. I order the securing of his firearm, the removal of his badge, and that he be escorted out of this courtroom. The room erupted. Officer Mills looked to his colleague, Officer Lydia Trent. The two nodded at each other, then approached Moore to disarm him, unlock the cuffs, and instructed him to place his hands behind his back. Moore shouted, "You people don't know who I am. I'll take all of you down." Callista simply replied, "You didn't know who I was, and that was your fatal mistake." All of it happened in just 4 minutes and 16 seconds, from the first slap to the moment Logan Moore was handcuffed before the eyes of the public. But this wasn't the end. It was the beginning. The slap across Callista Parker's face didn't just lead to the immediate arrest of an officer. It was like a steel hammer smashing into a concrete door long sealed shut by fear, collusion, and silence. And when that door began to crack, what poured out wasn't just the truth. It was the stench of a system rotten to its core. That very night, Callista stayed awake, combing through a hastily printed file from the archives department. Not out of anger, but because she knew the coming storm wouldn't just sweep away Logan Moore. It would reach those who once whispered in her ear at receptions, sat across from her during friendly meetings, and told her, "You handle your part. We'll take care of the rest." She activated emergency procedure number 11, one of the special protocols reserved for the city's Chief Justice, enabling interagency coordination between the court, Internal Affairs Unit, and the State Department of Justice. Within 48 hours, the Havenbrook Internal Affairs Unit, under the leadership of Chief Inspector Rachel Lynn, had reopened Logan Moore's entire 15-year record. they discovered 19 official complaints had been misplaced in storage. 14 of them related to unnecessary use of force, while the rest included allegations of racial discrimination and abuse of authority during warrantless searches. Most troubling, in 7 cases where body camera footage existed, 2 entire video segments had mysteriously vanished from the system, marked as technical failure due to encoding error. However, the tech team confirmed the cameras had been functioning normally minutes before and after the incidents, strongly suggesting human tampering. The deeper the investigation went, the more corrupt ties emerged. 4 prosecutors, including Carson Ramsey, were named in cases where Moore was the arresting officer, but charges were never filed, and dismissal decisions lacked any documented justification. One of the most outrageous cases involved the arrest of Kenneth Powell, a 22-year-old detained for suspicious behavior while standing outside his own home at 10 p.m. Kenneth spent 9 days in jail, lost his job, lost his scholarship, and the case never reached court. Callista also uncovered an internal audio recording taken from the officer's locker room in 2022, in which Moore is heard laughing with colleagues. Let her try. She thinks she's got more power than me? Ain't nobody touching me. This recording had been buried in the unprocessed audio archive of the disciplinary department. Then came the money. After requesting independent auditors to investigate, Callista received the first financial report within 72 hours. Logan Moore's secondary bank account in Delaware had received at least 17 wire transfers, totaling $83,400 over the past 18 months. The sender was a security firm called Eastern Shield Logistics, a known campaign contributor to Mayor Vincent Harper, whom Moore had openly supported. As the press began digging, another name surfaced from the past: Julia Spence, an investigative reporter who had covered police misconduct cases in Havenbrook. She died in a strange car accident late last year. No skid marks, dashcam data wiped, and the official report cited weather conditions. However, her boyfriend, a software engineer, once said, "Julia told me she was close to cracking the link between the police, City Hall, and a group of private investors. Then she went silent." Under mounting pressure, Callista formally submitted a request for the FBI to open a parallel investigation, citing suspicion of an interagency abuse network operating for over a decade, involving public funds and systemic civil rights violations. The Havenbrook prosecutor's office, under Carson Ramsey's leadership, responded coldly and sluggishly. They didn't deny the allegations, but neither did they fully cooperate. Callista submitted 3 requests for case file access, 2 of which were rejected with the explanation, "under internal review." On Thursday morning, the Havenbrook City Hall officially contacted Callista's office. A secretary transferred the call. The voice on the other end belonged to the deputy mayor. The tone was gentle, but the words were clear. "Judge Parker, we think you should let things cool down. Let the professionals handle it. Otherwise, there may be a reassessment of your role in the upcoming term." Callista listened to the end. She said nothing. She simply paused for a few seconds, then hung up. Not a word. Because she knew it wasn't the first time someone tried to silence her. But this time, they forgot. She was the one who broke open that concrete door, and she would be the one to keep it open, until the light reached every last shadow. On Friday afternoon, monsoon winds swept through the gray rows of buildings in Havenbrook, carrying the thick air of something about to explode. On the 6th floor of the Superior Court, Callista Parker sat in her office, eyes locked onto the dense report from the Internal Affairs team. She knew this battle wasn't just about a slap. It was about the survival of the entire justice system, and she had chosen her role. the one who wields the gavel among wolves. The desk phone rang. The caller ID displayed no name. Callista picked up. On the other end, a deep, seasoned male voice, sharp as ice. Judge Parker. This is Gregory Vaughn, Chief of Staff to the Mayor of Havenbrook. No pleasantries, no apologies. Just a blunt, loaded message. We want to preserve stability in the city. What you're doing could trigger unnecessary chaos. We need a calm environment, not media frenzy or destructive investigations. Consider that. Callista wasn't angry, nor was she surprised. She replied with a voice calm but sharp as glass. The law wasn't made to protect those who preserve false order. Then she hung up. That night, at 11:36 p.m., her private phone received an anonymous text message, just 10 words. If you don't stop, what you lose won't be your position. Without hesitation, Callista immediately called Carter Hall, her loyal bodyguard, who had stood by her side for over 12 years. A former Marine, Carter had protected 3 federal judges and had never failed. Carter, she said, protect Malik and my sister. Don't take your eyes off them. Within 30 minutes, 2 black SUVs pulled up in front of Callista's house. Inside were 2 agents from the Federal Department of Justice, Rosalind Keene and Felix Reyes, both from the Interagency Crime Task Force. They were dispatched following an emergency request from the FBI after receiving documents submitted by Callista. Rosalind placed a file nearly 400 pages thick on Callista's desk, marked, classified, Tier 2 Interagency Risk. Inside was a stream of data that silenced the room. The spotlight wasn't just on Logan Moore, but on a complex network of prosecutors, senior officers, and even retired judges. Moore had once been investigated in 2016 for beating a 17-year-old boy named Xavier Miles, causing a mild traumatic brain injury. Body camera footage should have held Moore accountable, but the dismissal order was approved swiftly, signed by none other than Deputy Prosecutor Carson Ramsey. Worse still, one name repeatedly surfaced in 7 investigative files tied to disappearing evidence, unavailable case records, and internal audit reports with altered timestamps. His name was Vincent Alcott, former federal judge of Havenbrook, retired in 2011. After retiring, he became a legal advisor to a security conglomerate, none other than Eastern Shield Logistics, the same company that had wired funds to Logan Moore's Delaware account. Rosalind concluded, "We're not just dealing with a rogue officer. We're facing a protection network that spanned over a decade, covering police, prosecution, and judiciary. What's alarming is they've succeeded until now, because no one dared to touch them." Callista leaned back in her chair, but her eyes were far from tired. She asked only one question. "If we start with Moore, who's next?" Felix Reyes answered by flipping to another page. Over 27 names marked in red. 14 are still in active positions. Among them, 2 members of the City Council. The next morning, the front page of the Havenbrook Free Voice carried just one bold headline: "The Slap in Court, beginning to unravel Havenbrook's shadow network." But that was just the surface, because Callista knew, when a system starts to shake, the first to panic will expose the weakest link. 3 days after the resounding slap at the Havenbrook Superior Court, the air in the city grew dense, as if every building, every office, and every gaze were fixed on the same unfolding story. But while the public was just beginning to scratch the surface, Callista Parker and her investigative team were diving deep into a hellish layer few dared to believe existed. A decayed power network fueled by silence, money, and fear. 72 hours after initiating the investigation, the joint team of federal agents and court personnel had reviewed over 700 criminal cases in Havenbrook from the past 15 years. Of those, 40 were flagged as irregular in procedural conduct and coercive enforcement. Notably, 27 of them listed Logan Moore as the initial arresting officer. In 9 high-priority cases, Moore was the sole author of the arrest report, and Deputy Prosecutor Carson Ramsey was the lead prosecutor. Even more alarming, 100% of the defendants were black males under the age of 25. 6 of them had no legal representation during their initial hearings, a blatant violation of their constitutional right to counsel. As Rosalind Keene, the federal agent, dug deeper into financial records, 3 names unexpectedly surfaced: Gold Edge Capital, Shieldline Ventures, and North Harbor Trust. All 3 were private finance companies listed as donors to the Havenbrook Police Fund for the Community, publicly branded as a frontline officer support initiative. However, independent audit reports revealed that over 62% of total donations, nearly $740,000 over 5 years, had been funneled into a separate account labeled Legal Defense Fund. From this account, money was used to pay private legal fees for Moore and 5 other officers whenever a civilian complaint was filed. In another document Keene traced from a Georgia bank, a $15,000 wire transfer was recorded from a shell company called Atlas Dynamics, based in suburban Atlanta. According to federal records, this company had previously donated $80,000 to Mayor Vincent Harper's re-election campaign. Deeper within the digital infrastructure, the tech team discovered that several corrupted body cam videos were not due to technical malfunction, but had been manually transferred to a secondary server and deleted remotely using a top-tier admin account. The account owner, Martin Alcott, 26, a systems engineer at the police department and the direct nephew of former federal judge Vincent Alcott. As the pieces began to align, Callista realized this was no longer an internal inquiry. It was a full picture of an antiquated regime operating in the shadows, where law was twisted, evidence erased, and citizens, particularly black citizens, became victims of a fabricated order. And Callista decided to strike back. She submitted a formal request to open a public hearing, bypassing exclusive media outlets, ignoring filtered press protocols. She wanted every camera, every microphone, and every eye to witness the truth, unfiltered, unpoliticized. She prepared a list, typed and printed crisply on ivory white heavy paper, titled, "Personnel to be summoned for public hearing, Level 1, Havenbrook Court." The list contained 12 names. Among them, Vincent Alcott, former judge; Carson Ramsey, current deputy prosecutor; Logan Moore, sergeant, currently detained; Martin Alcott, system administrator; Lieutenant Harold Beck, Captain Tina Rourke, and Detective Linus Greer, 3 senior officers linked to suppressed case files, along with 5 others, including 1 sitting member of the Havenbrook City Council. Each name on that list was a spear aimed straight at the system, and Callista knew it well. "Disclosure is one thing," she told Carter, while sealing the file to be sent to the state court. "But surviving disclosure is another." Dawn in Havenbrook was no longer a peaceful beginning. The gray sky blanketed the city like a silent omen. Inside an 8th-floor apartment on Ashbury Street, Callista Parker was preparing documents for the upcoming public hearing when the doorbell rang. The delivery man said little. He simply placed down an unmarked parcel, no return address, no sender listed, bearing only a single line: "To Judge Parker. Urgent." Callista opened the box with her bare hands. Inside was no mail bomb, no white powder, perhaps something even more dangerous: a photograph. It was plain, unedited, taken from a distance with a phone or telephoto lens. Her 13-year-old nephew, Malik, riding his bike home from school, backpack slung over his shoulders, laughing while texting. The photo had no artistry, but the message on the back sent a chill down Callista's spine. Stay in your lane. The handwriting was jagged, written in black marker, deliberate, coarse, and unapologetically crude. Callista clenched the photo in her hand, the veins on her index finger standing out. Her face turned pale for a brief moment, but then she took a deep breath. Calling Carter, her loyal bodyguard, she said exactly 8 words, not one more. Call the U.S. Marshals. I'm done staying silent. That very afternoon, the United States Marshals Service issued an emergency bulletin, placing Callista Parker's family, her sister and nephew, under Tier 1 Special Emergency Witness Protection. A tactical team was deployed, agents assigned to every entry point to her apartment, vehicles rotated, phones replaced, and Malik's entire school schedule was suspended to ensure no vulnerabilities were exposed. Meanwhile, in the county detention facility, Logan Moore was entering his 6th day in custody. He sat on a cold iron bench, wrists secured with soft cuffs, his eyes a mix of anger and exhaustion. When the interrogation room door opened, it wasn't an investigator. It wasn't a lawyer. It was a stranger. No name. No introduction. Black suit. Thin tie. Steps so soft they seemed not to make a sound. The man sat across from Logan, placing a manila envelope on the table, then opening it to reveal a stack of documents. Inside, a photo of Callista taken from her office window, her exact residential address, Malik's personal information, school details, and dismissal times. Callista's upcoming court schedule for the next 3 weeks. No threats were spoken. Just one sentence, delivered in a flat tone, like reciting a receipt. A warning. No need to touch her. Just make her afraid. Logan looked at the man, then at the file. This wasn't a promise of salvation. It was an order, a cold edict, turning him into a tool, nothing more. And Logan understood that, because now he was no longer the legend of the police force he once believed himself to be. He was a black pawn on the chessboard of a force much larger than he'd ever imagined. Logan nodded, not out of commitment, but out of fear, because he knew, if he refused, the next one to receive a distant photo could be his own wife and children. That evening, Callista's personal phone rang again, a message from an unknown number with just 7 words. Nice house. Nephew's bike looks brand new. She set the phone down, unhurried. Carter stood beside her, eyes as cold as tempered steel. Callista said nothing more, but in her gaze, one truth blazed bright. Now they've come after my family. They'll regret it. Early Monday morning, crowds surged toward the Havenbrook Superior Court like never before. On the stone steps leading to the main hall, reporters from at least 9 regional news networks jostled for position, cameras aimed squarely at the doors, where an unprecedented public hearing in the city's judicial history was about to unfold. She wore no black judicial robe. She did not enter through the judge's private corridor. Callista Parker arrived as a citizen, simple, composed, yet commanding. She entered courtroom 3 carrying a worn black leather briefcase, hands steady, eyes unblinking. And for the first time in her nearly 40-year career, she voluntarily recused herself from the bench to avoid any accusation of bias in the case against Logan Moore. I was the one who got slapped in this room, but I didn't come here for revenge. I came for the truth. The courtroom erupted into murmurs. Nearly 200 people packed the seats. Over 400 more followed the official live-stream broadcast into the hallway, the cafe across the street, and thousands watched on social media. The hashtag number Callista Speaks reached Twitter's top 3 trending topics in just 17 minutes. Callista pulled out a folder. It wasn't a bundle of incriminating evidence. It was a list. A list of 12 names, 7 police officers, including Logan Moore and others suspected of tampering with records. 2 assistant prosecutors, including Carson Ramsey. 1 retired state judge, Vincent Alcott. 1 Havenbrook City Council member tied to shady correctional budget allocations. And 1 final individual with no official title, referred to only as the Shadow Connection, the figure behind financial transfers and evidence deletions. The most shocking moment came afterward. Callista didn't read the names aloud. She let a 2019 audio recording play through the courtroom speakers. If she keeps pushing this thing, Logan Moore's voice in a locker room. Clara? Or that Callista lady? Carson Ramsey responded, followed by both men laughing. We know how to shut her up. A deafening silence followed for 15 seconds. Carson Ramsey, seated in the front row, turned pale. Beads of sweat formed on his neck and trickled under his white shirt collar. His wrist trembled as he adjusted his tie. But before he could react, Callista opened another section of the folder. Financial records. A color-printed document titled Internal Allocation Report. Havenbrook Youth Fund, 2021. Highlighted in red, transfer of $63,214 from Youth Scholarship Fund to Legal Defense Fund for Law Enforcement Personnel. Authorized by C. Ramsey. Date, June 1st, 2021. Purpose: emergency support for Officer Logan Moore in internal complaint case. The truth was undeniable, clear, irrefutable. Reporters sprang to their feet. Citizens applauded. A middle-aged black woman stood up and shouted from the gallery, "They took my son's scholarship to cover for that man." Callista raised her hand. The room fell silent again. And she spoke, not with the voice of a judge, but as a mother, a citizen, a witness who had survived the corrosion of justice. I don't need the bench to speak the truth. I believe in due process. But justice must never be silent. Not today, not in Havenbrook, not while the people still expect something righteous from this system. Media cameras captured the moment Ramsey quietly exited the courtroom, his face ashen, lost. Vincent Alcott, seated in the back row, kept his head bowed the entire hearing, unable to lift his eyes. Less than 24 hours after Callista Parker publicly revealed the list of 12 names, one name spread across social media, with even more shock than the rest. Vincent Alcott, the former senior state judge, once hailed as the beacon of justice in Havenbrook, and the very man who had placed his hand on Callista's shoulder when she was sworn in as the city's first judge. Vincent, now 78, had been retired for 6 years, but remained a symbol. His image standing in the courthouse courtyard, holding a copy of the Constitution, had once been etched into the legal history of Havenbrook. The public had trusted him, and Callista had once revered him like a second father in the legal profession. But the truth bore no resemblance to memory. New investigative reports revealed that in 2011, when Callista was still a prosecutor, she had proposed a hearing for a case involving a 16-year-old boy named Elliot Green, who had his arm broken by Officer Logan Moore while handcuffed in the back of a patrol car. Elliot was an honor student with no prior record, arrested for resisting a public officer after reacting to being called a racial slur. The civil suit filed by Elliot's family had been escalated to the state civil court, where the presiding judge was none other than Vincent Alcott. According to internal records now made public, Vincent denied the hearing on the grounds of insufficient evidence of police misconduct. But handwritten notes by his former clerk, now cooperating with federal investigators, revealed something chilling. Met with Sergeant. Moore, after hours, agreed to keep it quiet. These kinds of cases shouldn't set a precedent. At the same time, Havenbrook's press and social media exploded when an anonymous article was published on havenbrooknews.net, a new, previously unknown site, not affiliated with any reputable news outlet in the state. The article's title read, "Judge Parker, A Double Life in College, Extremist Activism, Anti-Government Stance, and a History of Violence." The piece included photoshopped images from the 1980s, a young black woman raising a fist at a protest in Boston, a doctored video clip of a student's speech criticizing the U.S. prison system, falsely attributed to Callista, and hundreds of fake accounts sharing the hashtag #WeOrParkerOut, accusing her of being anti-American. A calculated smear campaign had begun. Photos of her nephew Malik were altered, spreading false rumors that her nephew was once arrested for marijuana possession. Live-stream clips from the hearing were edited, falsely inserting statements she never made. A TikTok account was created solely to replay a manipulated quote. Callista Parker says, "Justice isn't for everyone," a line twisted from a completely different context, but she did not falter. That night, as news tickers flashed red with headlines like "Parker facing allegations," her phone buzzed. Vincent Alcott was calling. His voice remained soft, but cold as the Havenbrook winter of 1983. "Callista," he began, "if you continue, you won't just lose your seat, you'll lose everything." Callista didn't remain silent as she had in the past. This time, her voice rang out. Slow, each word slicing like cold steel. "The system should exist to protect the truth. If it exists only to shield men like you, then it deserves to collapse." That same night, she sent an encrypted data packet to the Federal Department of Justice, a dossier she had kept for 10 years, unknown even to those closest to her. Inside were audio recordings of internal calls between judges and police chiefs, forensic digital reconstructions of shredded documents, handwritten notes detailing 17 cases dismissed despite clear anomalies, and a personal statistical breakdown of racial sentencing disparity in Havenbrook. 73% of all defendants from 2010 to 2020 were black, though they made up only 28% of the population. Callista had never intended to use that file, but after the attacks on her honor, her family, and her career, she understood. This game no longer played by the old rules. At the Federal Detention Center in the northern suburbs of Havenbrook, once reserved for high-value federal suspects, Logan Moore was cut off from the entire underground protection network. He had lived long enough under the shelter of powerful individuals to understand this. When his name was made public, and Vincent was called out by name in front of the media, the umbrella that once shielded him now hovered above his neck like a blade. Logan was not a brave man. He was a pragmatist. And when he saw even Carson Ramsey begin to tremble, he understood. Either cooperate or die in the dark. In an 11-hour-long session with agents Keene and Reyes, alongside representatives from the Department of Justice, Logan began to talk. Each name, each piece of the puzzle. He didn't just sell out Vincent. He flipped on the entire system that had protected him for over a decade. 12 names were recorded, each one explosive. Lieutenant Brian Kessler, head of the Narcotics Task Force, accused of staging emergency scenarios to arrest individuals without warrants. Officer Darnell Stroud, present in 9 cases of coerced confessions from minors, especially those without guardians or attorneys. Officer Gina Larkin, responsible for analyzing body cam footage, found to have shut down servers at least 6 times before submitting evidence. Sergeant Alan Pierce directly assisted Moore in putting suspects in the car, a coded reference to pre-processing beatings. Officer Dennis Cobb financially linked to a private security firm offering legal risk advisory to officers facing complaints. Deputy Prosecutor Mara Hill allegedly ordered DNA evidence favorable to a defendant to be disregarded in a case where Moore made the arrest. Deputy Prosecutor Justin Allen, involved in 4 cases with signs of evidence tampering, discovered to have undeclared cash transactions tied to an internal support fund. Councilman Gregory Roussel received $48,000 from a private fund to delay the vote on an independent police oversight bill. Captain Marvin Dale, retired, former police commander, photographed with Moore and Vincent at a Havenbrook Justice Foundation gala, suspected to be a financial front. Special Officer Alan Chen, former head of the police department's IT unit, accused of wiping the system after major incidents. Vincent Alcott, the spiritual architect, who maintained links between courts, prosecution, and city officials, and mentored numerous young judges, including Callista herself. An unnamed figure, referred to by Logan as the high-level overseer, only contacted via encrypted satellite line, allegedly responsible for signing off on all major operations over the past 15 years. Logan didn't know his real name, but confirmed the man had an office on the 7th floor of the old City Hall, where no records are monitored. When the list was complete, Agent Rosalind Keene said only one thing: "We're not investigating a police assault anymore. We're looking at an institutional protection network, linking the legislative, judicial, and executive branches." That very night, the Department of Justice issued an emergency order to expand the interagency investigation. A joint task force of FBI agents, internal affairs inspectors, and a special auditing unit was deployed to Havenbrook. 4 prosecutor offices were sealed. City Hall was closed for a day under the pretense of system upgrades. Just 1 day later, Carson Ramsey submitted his resignation letter. In it, he requested plea negotiations in exchange for personal protection and non-prosecution of his wife and children. The Department of Justice has not responded publicly, but internal sources say he provided information on 3 additional high-level anonymous directives issued via private lines. As for Vincent, he vanished. His condo in the Riverfront residential district was empty. No phone signal, no bank activity. The last footage caught by an elevator camera showed him carrying a suitcase, walking alone, turning down an eastern corridor, then disappearing. Logan Moore, once celebrated as a street legend, was now a Level 4 protected witness, housed in a secure compound under the codename Case Black 41. But at a press conference the following day, when a reporter asked Callista Parker, "Is the list of 12 enough?" she answered with just one sentence: "No." The ones who stayed silent, that's where the real danger lies. The investigation had yet to conclude when a new front erupted: the media. But this time, Callista Parker wasn't facing bullets or political forces. She was up against a weapon even more dangerous: public bias and agenda-driven media. Just 3 days after Logan Moore exposed the list of 12 names, a wave of conservative newspapers ran identical headlines. Judge Parker accused of reverse racism. Do white people even stand a chance under her rule? Callista, angel of justice or radical enforcer? On regional television, a middle-aged white man appeared during prime-time news, introducing himself as a victim who was denied legal protection by Callista simply because I'm not a minority. But within hours, a fact-checking group revealed that this man had never been a plaintiff in any case Judge Callista presided over. He was, in fact, a low-level technician at a local media company, invited to interview for $500 and a promise if he stuck to the script. It didn't stop there. Another broadcast claimed Callista was once reprimanded for mishandling a domestic violence case. The truth? That was a 1999 case in which she ordered police to escort a victim to a shelter, despite objections from the former police chief, setting a statewide standard for protecting women. The TV channel Freedom Alert even aired a 12-minute segment with spliced images, eerie effects, and a menacing soundtrack, titled, "When Justice is Hijacked, Who Will Save Havenbrook from Callista Parker?" But this time, she didn't stay silent. Callista held a full financial transparency press conference for the entire media. Her entire record, salary history, political contributions, judicial rulings, even 10 years' worth of personal bank statements, was disclosed. She didn't stop at transparency. She invited 5 real victims, people who had once been crushed by the old system and whom she had fought to protect, to speak publicly. Anthony Jarrell, a wrongfully convicted man exonerated after 12 years in prison thanks to Callista's decision to reopen his case. Linda Qualls, a single mother who nearly lost custody of her child because she had no lawyer until Callista appointed private counsel to help her win. Daryl Kim, a young Asian American falsely arrested because he fit the description, freed after Callista demanded independent DNA testing. At an outdoor speech in front of City Hall, a 58-second clip of Callista's words went viral, amassing over 14 million shares in the first week. "I didn't burn the system. I lit it up, and it set itself on fire." Callista Parker. The clip spread across online forums. Thousands of TikTok users added music, text, and reactions, transforming the quote into a rallying cry for the number "Justice Does Not Sleep" movement. However, transparency came with risk. Carter, Callista's loyal bodyguard, began to be followed. His car brakes were cut while parked outside his girlfriend's home. On another night, he was cornered by 2 unidentified men at a gas station. Fortunately, federal agents monitoring the scene intervened in time. Callista's family became targets of smear campaigns. An individual claiming to be an independent journalist approached her nephew's school, attempting to interview teachers to dig up private information. As tensions escalated, the Department of Justice established a special protective detail. 4 full-time agents, a dedicated legal team, and 24/7 surveillance at the residence of Callista, her sister, and her nephew. Ironically, the negative press pressure drew national media attention. CNN, MSNBC, and the New York Times all ran features calling Callista the woman who took down the Southern Power Network. She was no longer just a judge. She had become a symbol, not for legal authority, but for refusal to back down. And in the shadows, those who once controlled Havenbrook's power structures began to realize the game was no longer in their hands. On October 17th at 8 a.m., the Federal Court of District 4 in Havenbrook was packed to capacity. Nearly 300 seats were filled, with people crowding the aisles and hallways. National media outlets were present. CNN, BBC, MSNBC, Al Jazeera, all with live broadcast setups outside. A triple-layered security perimeter surrounded the premises. The trial of Sergeant Logan Moore, the man once hailed as a legend in law enforcement, was about to begin. 5 serious charges were detailed in the indictment: assaulting a federal judge, maximum sentence of 20 years; obstruction of justice and investigation tampering; destruction of evidence in 9 criminal cases; threatening federal witnesses, including minors; abuse of power and violation of civil rights. Each charge came with supporting evidence: videos, audio recordings, bank documents, and witness testimonies, leaving no room for denial. At the witness stand, Callista Parker appeared in a pitch-black outfit and a heavy robe, unadorned yet commanding. She was no longer the presiding judge. Today, she was the victim, a living witness, and a symbol. Moore's defense attorney, unable to dispute the act of slapping a judge in open court, pivoted to an argument of temporary psychological instability, attempting to justify that Moore had been under extreme stress from work-related pressure. However, the prosecution played a 17-minute compilation of Moore's derogatory remarks, violent behavior, and racist statements over the past 4 years, including a clip where he said, "Is there a law that says a cop can't slap someone blocking the way?" When Callista was called to take the oath and stood before the bench, the room fell completely silent. Only the soft hum of the microphone could be heard. "I swear to tell the truth, not for revenge, but to defend the justice I've devoted my life to serve." The attorney asked her to describe the moment of the assault. She answered calmly, "He didn't slap my face. He slapped justice, the very institution he was supposed to protect." The courtroom held its breath. A journalist later wrote on Twitter, "In 15 years covering federal courts, I've never witnessed a statement that made an entire courtroom stop breathing at once." Moore, silent throughout the proceedings, began to cry. But they weren't tears of remorse. They were the tears of a man who realized the wall had crumbled, and no one was coming to save him. After 3 days of trial and 6 hours of deliberation, the jury returned a unanimous 12-0 verdict. Logan Moore was found guilty on all 5 charges. The presiding judge handed down a preliminary sentence, 43 years in federal prison without parole. And that was just one link in the chain. Immediately after the verdict, the Federal Department of Justice reopened over 120 past case files, 74 of which were directly handled by Moore. The rest linked to ADA Ramsey, Lieutenant Kessler, and other officers previously named by Logan. 6 retired officers were summoned for questioning. 3 invoked the Fifth Amendment and refused to answer, but 2 agreed to cooperate in exchange for immunity, unleashing a new wave of evidence that pushed the investigation deeper into the inner workings of Havenbrook City Hall. Vincent Alcott, the judge who had disappeared, was formally indicted in absentia on 3 counts: shielding illegal activity, abusing judicial power, and interfering with a federal criminal investigation. A nationwide federal arrest warrant was issued. A new police chief was appointed. The sitting mayor announced he would not seek re-election. The Havenbrook District Attorney's Office was placed under Department of Justice oversight for 24 months. And when Callista Parker stepped out through the glass doors of the federal courthouse that afternoon, amid a forest of microphones, flashing lights, and reporters shouting her name, she neither raised her fist nor bowed her head. She simply said, "Justice is not something someone gives you. It's something you have to rise up and reclaim and hold on to with your whole heart." The people of Havenbrook lined the street on both sides. No one said a word. They simply applauded, not for a verdict, but for the woman who had dared to bring light to a city long shrouded in darkness. On November 12th, on a snowless morning beneath a sky as gray as if signaling an ending, Judge Callista Parker stepped into the Havenbrook State Judicial Hall, a place that had witnessed countless historic trials presided over by her. Today, she was not there to deliver a verdict. Today, she was there to resign. No one saw it coming, though many felt it was inevitable. After 37 years of service, over a decade on the highest bench of the Superior Court, and one earth-shaking year that exposed layer after layer of rot within the Southern justice system, Callista chose to step back. The press room was packed. More than 40 journalists from within and outside the state, 3 live television broadcasts, and hundreds of citizens lined up outside the courthouse to watch. Those who had once opposed her stood silent. Those she had once protected shed tears. Callista stepped up to the podium, holding no paper, with no aide by her side. Her voice was steady, each word carved into the air. I'm not leaving because I broke. I'm leaving so the next one won't have to fight the way I did. Applause erupted, but she did not bow her head. The State Judicial Council had met beforehand and unanimously proposed to rename Federal Hearing Room C on the 3rd floor as the Callista Parker Room to honor her role in purging the system. However, in a closed meeting after her resignation announcement, Callista made a decision that stunned everyone. I decline to have any room named after me. I don't need a plaque. I need this system to be cleaner. And she meant it. The entire $75,000 budget for the tribute ceremony was redirected, at her request, to the Legal Aid Fund for victims of wrongful prosecution. On her final day in office, Callista did not appear in any conference room nor grant interviews. She walked alone into the courtroom she knew best, Courtroom 5, where she had presided over more than 600 cases in 11 years. No staff, no reporters, just the thick wooden judge's bench and the pale morning light seeping through the old window panes. She stepped up, placed her right hand on the bench, and closed her eyes. No one knows what she thought during the nearly 2 minutes of silence. Maybe about her father, who died wrongly imprisoned without an apology. Maybe about the 17-year-old boy coerced into a confession, almost robbed of his youth. Or maybe about herself, the poor black girl from East Havenbrook, who once thought the law was a luxury meant for others. Then she lifted her hand, gave a faint nod, and stepped out of that room like turning the final page of a chapter. That afternoon, an old Ford sedan, the kind Callista always used to avoid attention, left the inner city, heading southeast. Its destination, East Havenbrook, the impoverished neighborhood where it all began. No bodyguards, no media caravan. Locals still remembered the wooden house at number 47 Lansing Street, where she lived with her mother and sister after her father's wrongful imprisonment, was still intact. For the first time in 30 years, Callista returned to live there, among people who had long seen her as a silent hero. A week later, the media discovered she was teaching a free class titled Law Basics for the People at the community library. Tuition, $0. The first session had over 80 attendees, mostly low-income workers, immigrant laborers, and students of color. A 19-year-old freshman law student approached her after class and asked, "You've already stepped down. Why are you still teaching?" Callista smiled, her answer simple yet profound. Because the flame of justice doesn't belong to a position. It lives in anyone brave enough to keep it burning. And so, though she left the court, the fight continued. In every classroom, every case, and every person she inspired. When Callista Parker stepped away from the spotlight of justice she had upheld for nearly 4 decades, the city of Havenbrook was still trembling. But what remained wasn't just verdicts or powerful figures brought to account. What lingered deeper was a question for all of us. Is justice a robe, or the person who wears it? Some say Callista was too radical. Others believe she should have played safe to protect herself and her family. But if everyone chooses silence, when will the darkness retreat? This story may be ending, but the debate surely isn't. Will we live in a system that serves the people, or those wearing uniforms and badges? What do you think? Leave your comment below. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, hit like, share, and subscribe to Black Strength Stories, so you won't miss a single journey exposing injustice and honoring the power within our community.